My sister hid my exam bag the morning of the test, then told me I needed to be knocked down a peg. When I confronted her, she smirked and said, "Even if I did it, maybe you deserved it." I just walked away. That was 9 months ago. Yesterday, she was found guilty of harassment in court. My jealous sister tried to sabotage my college entrance exam and told our parents that I owe it to her when I passed. So I made her the clown at my celebration dinner. I grew up with my older sister, Lena. To my parents, Lena is the perfect child. Smart, pretty, responsible. To me, she's been manipulative since we were little. In 5th grade, we had a group art project at home. Lena accidentally spilled juice on my poster the night before it was due. I cried and she told our parents she was rushing so it fell off the table. They believed her. I stayed up until midnight remaking the whole thing while she watched TV. When I turned 12, my mom let me pick my birthday cake. I chose chocolate. On that day, the bakery delivered a strawberry cake instead. Lena said, "Chocolate is boring. I told mom you'd like this better." She smirked while everyone sang happy birthday. My parents said, "Your sister just wanted you to try something new." In middle school, I got a perfect score on a math test. That night at dinner, Lena told my parents she only did so well because I tutored her. I'd never asked her for help, but my parents praised her instead of me. That was my whole childhood. She'd undermine me, take credit, and somehow I was the ungrateful one if I got upset. I learned to keep my head down, study hard, and focus on my own goals. The college entrance exam became my biggest dream, my shot at my top choice university, and maybe my chance to be seen as capable in my family. 2 months before the exam, I came home from school to find my desk a mess. My binders and notebooks, all my exam prep, were gone. I found them in the trash bin outside. Lena said, "They looked old and ugly. You don't need to study that much anyway. It's unhealthy." I was devastated. Those notes took months to make. My parents? "Your sister was just helping you relax. You're too uptight." I stayed up every night for weeks redoing them. Then 1 week before the exam, my alarm clock suddenly stopped working. It was fully charged, but the battery pack was gone. I found it in Lena's desk drawer. She laughed and said, "Oh, I borrowed it for something and forgot. Chill. It's not like you'll fail from one bad night of sleep." Again, my parents said, "Stop making drama." On the morning of the exam, I woke up to the smell of burnt toast. My breakfast, the one I'd prepped the night before, was in the trash. Lena was eating hers, smiling at me. "Oops, thought this was mine. You can grab something on the way." Then I couldn't find my bag with my pens, ID, and calculator. After panicking for 20 minutes, I found it shoved behind the washing machine. I barely made it to the test center on time, heart pounding. A week later, Lena left her phone on the couch. A message popped up from her friend. "Did she mess up? Did your plan work?" I opened the chat. Lena had been bragging for weeks about messing with my things, so I'd chill out and stop acting smarter than her. She admitted hiding my notes, stealing my alarm battery, and making me almost late on purpose. She even wrote, "If she screws this up, mom and dad will finally stop comparing me to her." When I confronted her, she smirked. "You're being paranoid. You twist things to make me look bad." Then she added, "Even if I did it, maybe it's because you needed to be knocked down a peg." My parents? "Your sisters. Don't let petty fights ruin your bond." She didn't mean it. My dad said, "You did fine on the exam anyway, so what's the big deal?" I told them they'd always excused her behavior. I told Lena she was dead to me. I moved in with my aunt. The exam results came last week. I passed with one of the highest scores in the district. I got into my dream university with a scholarship. Meanwhile, Lena failed one of her college courses and had to retake it. At my celebration dinner, she tried to brag about helping me by toughening me up. I cut her off, loud enough for the whole table. "You didn't help me. You tried to sabotage me because you can't stand me doing better than you. The only reason I'm here is because I fought twice as hard to overcome your petty little games." The room went silent. Lena left the table red-faced. 1 week before I was supposed to move into my dorm, I was packing up my clothes when I got an email from the university's admissions office. The subject line made my stomach drop. "Urgent. Change to your enrollment status." My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. The email said someone filed a complaint against me for having unfair advantages during the entrance exam. My scholarship was suspended pending investigation. The complaint came through the university's ethics portal anonymously. I stared at the screen, reading it 3 more times. My chest felt tight and I couldn't breathe right. I grabbed my phone and called the admissions office immediately. The secretary put me on hold for 10 minutes before telling me Dean Holloway would review my case. She said the investigation could take 4 to 6 weeks. I had 2 weeks to submit a written response with any supporting evidence. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I took screenshots of everything. I threw my clothes in a bag and drove straight to Aunt Claire's house where I'd been staying since the fight with my parents. She was in the kitchen making lunch when I burst through the door. I showed her the email on my phone. She read it once, then twice, then a 3rd time. Her face got darker with each reading. She set down her coffee cup hard enough to make it splash. "This has Lena written all over it," she said while pouring us both tea. We sat at her kitchen table going through the email word by word. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I kept replaying every interaction with Lena since the exam results came out. Her smirk at the celebration dinner kept flashing in my mind. Her comment about me being knocked down a peg echoed in my head. The way she left the table when I called her out in front of everyone. I got up at 3 in the morning and started pacing around the guest room. The next morning I started documenting everything I could remember. I created a timeline of all of Lena's sabotage attempts on my laptop. The destroyed notes 2 months before the exam, the missing alarm battery 1 week before, the hidden bag on exam morning. I typed everything out with dates and details, but I realized I needed actual proof beyond just my word against hers. I texted Mom asking if we could talk about the situation. She responded within minutes saying she didn't want to hear about Lena again. She said I got my scholarship and should stop being vindictive. I stared at her message feeling completely alone. My own parents wouldn't even listen to me. Aunt Claire found me crying at the kitchen table and sat down beside me. She suggested checking if Lena left any digital trail of her plans. That's when I remembered the text messages I saw on her phone that day. The ones where she admitted to her friend about messing with my stuff. If I could get screenshots of those messages, I'd have actual evidence. But Lena would never let me near her phone again. I spent the entire weekend writing my response to the university. Every word had to be perfect. I detailed exactly what happened on exam morning, how I arrived frazzled but took the test fairly without any advantages. I didn't mention Lena yet because I needed proof first. 3 days passed slowly while while I worked on my statement. Monday morning, I drove past my parents' house on the way to get more of my things. Lena's car was parked in the driveway. I knew she had classes that morning, which meant she was skipping again. Her failed course must have been affecting her more than she wanted to admit. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. Brittany Smith had messaged me out of nowhere. Her message was short but made my heart race. "Your sister is psycho. I'm done with her drama." Brittany was one of Lena's closest friends since high school. If she was turning against Lena, maybe she'd be willing to help me. I messaged back asking if we could talk, and she replied within minutes saying she could meet me downtown tomorrow. The next morning, I drove to the coffee shop she suggested and found her already sitting in a corner booth. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy bun. She waved me over and pushed a coffee toward me that she'd already ordered. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. She told me Lena had been losing it ever since I got the scholarship and that she'd made Brittany help her file some kind of complaint. My stomach dropped as she turned her phone toward me, showing an email chain between her and Lena. The messages went back weeks, with Lena planning how to tell the university that I'd cheated on my entrance exam. She'd written that she knew I had answer keys because she'd seen them in my room, which was completely made up. My hands started shaking as I read more lies about how I'd paid someone to take parts of the test for me. Brittany forwarded the whole chain to my email and said she was done being part of Lena's crazy plans. I thanked her and left the coffee shop feeling sick to my stomach. Back in my car, I sat there for 20 minutes just staring at the emails on my phone. This wasn't just about messing with my stuff anymore. Lena wanted to destroy my whole future because she couldn't stand that I'd done better than her. The hate in those messages was so deep it scared me. I drove straight to Aunt's house and showed her everything. She immediately said we needed to contact the dean's office at my university. I called that afternoon and his assistant said he could see me in 3 days. Those 3 days felt like forever as I gathered all my evidence, including Brittany's emails and my test prep notes. I also reached out to my high school teachers who agreed to write character references for me. Why would someone go through all that trouble just to mess with their sister's exam prep? There's something deeper going on here with Lena that we're not seeing yet. The timing of Brittany suddenly reaching out right when this investigation starts feels too convenient, doesn't it? Aunt helped me practice what I'd say in the meeting. We went over different questions he might ask and how to stay calm while explaining everything. She reminded me to stick to facts and not let my emotions take over, even though I was furious. The night before my meeting, Mom called me for the first time in weeks. She started yelling that Lena had told her I was trying to ruin her reputation at her college. I tried to explain that Lena had filed a false complaint against me, but Mom cut me off. She said Lena would never do something like that and hung up on me. I barely slept that night worrying about the meeting. The next morning, I put on my best outfit and drove to campus early. Dean Holloway's office was in the main administration building with dark wood panels and leather chairs. He was younger than I expected, with kind eyes behind wire glasses. I sat down and started presenting my evidence piece by piece. He looked through Brittany's emails and his frown got deeper with each page he read. When he asked about my family situation, I explained our history as calmly as I could. He took notes while I talked and asked me to clarify certain details about the timeline. He said filing a false complaint was serious enough for legal action if proven true. After the meeting, I walked to the campus fountain and sat on the stone edge. Students were walking past me heading to orientation events I should have been at too. Instead, I was here fighting to keep my future because my sister couldn't handle my success. 2 days later, I got an email from Dean Holloway that made me cry with relief. He was opening a formal investigation into the false complaint and reinstating my scholarship while they looked into it. I could move into my dorm as planned, which meant I'd finally escaped Lena's reach. I spent the next 3 days at Aunt's house packing everything I owned into boxes and suitcases. She helped me fold my clothes while we worked in comfortable silence, her hands steady as she smoothed out each shirt before placing it in the suitcase. When we finished the last box, she looked at me and said she was proud of me for not letting Lena win. The doorbell rang the next morning while I was taping up boxes in the living room. Mom stood on the porch with her arms crossed and her face tight with anger. She pushed past Aunt into the house and pointed her finger at me, saying I was destroying our family. Aunt stepped between us immediately and told Mom that Lena was destroying herself and she needed to stop enabling her. Mom's face crumpled and she started crying right there in the hallway, her shoulders shaking as she admitted she knew Lena had problems but didn't know how to help her. I watched my mother sob into her hands, and for the first time I saw past the perfect family facade she'd always tried to maintain. She wasn't just enabling Lena, she was completely lost and had been for years. That night I lay in bed, unable to shake the image of Mom's tears from my mind. Maybe my parents weren't just Lena's enablers but victims too, trapped in her manipulation the same way I'd been all those years. Moving day came 2 days later, and I loaded my car with boxes of dorm essentials, my hands shaking slightly as I carried each one to the trunk. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad saying good luck at school and that he was sorry. It was the first time he'd ever acknowledged any wrongdoing, and I texted back a simple thanks. The drive to campus took 2 hours, and I spent it playing music loud enough to drown out my thoughts about everything I was leaving behind. My dorm room was small but clean with 2 beds, and I picked the one by the window, unpacking my clothes into the tiny dresser. That first day on campus, I was checking my email between orientation sessions when I saw a message from Professor Elena Rodriguez, who taught ethics. She said the dean had asked her to review my case and asked if we could meet because there was something I should know about my sister. Her office was on the 3rd floor of the humanities building, cluttered with stacks of books and potted plants on every surface. She pulled out a manila folder from her desk drawer and opened it to show me grade reports and disciplinary forms with Lena's name on them. Professor Rodriguez explained that Lena had been her student last year and was caught submitting plagiarized work for her final paper. That's why she'd failed the course and had to retake it this semester. The professor leaned back in her chair and told me Lena had blamed me for her failure during the disciplinary hearing, claiming I was the golden child and she had to cheat to keep up with the pressure. She said she thought Lena was projecting her own academic dishonesty onto me with this false complaint. I walked across campus after the meeting with my mind spinning from what I'd learned. Lena's hatred came from her own failures, but knowing the reason didn't make the years of sabotage hurt any less. She'd chosen to tear me down instead of working to build herself up, and now she was trying to destroy my future because she'd ruined her own. A week into the semester, I was studying in the library when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said I thought I'd won, but they weren't done yet, and the writing style with its bitter tone was unmistakably Lena's. I screenshot the message and walked straight to campus security that same afternoon. The officer behind the desk took one look at the text and started filling out paperwork while explaining that a no-contact order would take several weeks to process, but would legally prevent any contact from Lena. I gave them copies of all the emails and messages I'd saved over the past few weeks. My phone buzzed while I was still at the security office, and Brittany's name appeared on the screen with a message saying Lena was telling everyone I'd forged those emails and was trying to turn their whole friend group against her. I told her to save every text and screenshot everything Lena posted online. The next few days became a blur of jumping at every notification and scanning every crowd for faces Lena might have sent to watch me. I couldn't focus during lectures because every unknown number calling made my hands shake. Every person walking behind me on campus paths made my heart race. The paranoia was making it impossible to eat or sleep properly. 2 weeks into the semester, my dad called while I was trying to study in my dorm room. He said Lena had been suspended from her college pending the investigation and was living at home now. He said she wasn't doing well, and Mom blamed me for ruining Lena's life. I hung up without responding and made an appointment with the campus counselor for the next morning. The counselor listened to everything and helped me work on breathing exercises to manage the panic attacks that had started happening during classes. She suggested I join a support group for students dealing with family trauma that met every Wednesday in the student center. I showed up to the next meeting and found 6 other students sitting in a circle who all had their own stories about toxic parents or siblings. For the first time since this all started, I didn't feel completely alone in dealing with family members who tried to destroy me. We met every week and shared coping strategies and just listened to each other without judgment. 3 days after my 4th support group meeting, the dean sent an email marked urgent to my student account. The investigation had found Lena guilty of filing a false complaint, and they were considering pressing fraud charges against her. He needed to know if I wanted to pursue legal action against her for the false accusations. I stared at that email for hours trying to decide what to do. Pressing charges would give me legal protection, but it would destroy any chance of ever fixing things with my parents. Not pressing charges would leave me vulnerable to whatever Lena might try next. I barely slept that night, going back and forth between protecting myself and not wanting to be the one who sent my sister to jail. 3 weeks into the semester, I called my aunt because I needed someone to help me think clearly about this decision. She listened to everything and then said that protecting myself wasn't being vindictive, but was necessary because Lena had made her choices. She reminded me that Lena had tried to destroy my future and would probably try again if I didn't take legal action now. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and typed my response to the dean saying I wanted to press charges. The next day, I got a call from the district attorney's office, and they assigned me a victim's advocate named Sarah, who explained the legal process would take several months. She walked me through what would happen next, including giving a deposition and possibly testifying if it went to trial. A month into the semester, Sandra called me back to her office where she had the restraining order paperwork ready. She explained the process while I signed each form, my hand cramping from writing the same information over and over. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out, and I'd have to see Lena in court. Back in my dorm room, I buried myself in my textbooks and class notes, reading the same pages 3 times before anything stuck. Every knock on the door made me jump, and my roommate started noticing how I'd freeze whenever someone walked past our room. One night I told her everything about Lena, and after that she always checked through the peephole before opening the door. 3 days before the hearing, Mom sent me an email that went on for 5 pages about how Lena had lost her job and was seeing a therapist now. She wrote that pressing charges would destroy our family and begged me to think about what I was doing to my sister. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. That same week, my psychology professor asked me to stay after class, and we talked in her office about my situation. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a psychology textbook. Turns out the sister who called everyone else a cheater was the actual cheater all along. She told me about her own brother who had tormented her for years until she finally cut him off completely. She said something that stuck with me about how family doesn't give anyone permission to hurt you. My therapist had suggested I start writing down memories from childhood, so I bought a notebook and spent my evenings filling pages. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became, with every good grade, every achievement, every happy moment getting twisted or ruined by Lena. 2 weeks passed quickly, and suddenly I was walking up the courthouse steps with my folder of evidence. Inside the lobby, I saw them immediately. Mom, Dad, and Lena sitting on a bench near the metal detectors. Lena looked thinner, and her hair was unwashed, but when she saw me, her eyes narrowed with the same old hatred. We went through security and into the courtroom where I sat on one side with Sandra, while they sat on the other with Lena's lawyer. When my turn came, I handed over my evidence, including the emails, texts, and Brittany's messages about the whole scheme. Lena's lawyer tried to make it sound like normal sibling stuff, but the judge kept reading through the papers with his eyebrows getting lower and lower. Then Lena took the stand and started telling this whole story about how I'd always been jealous of her success. But when the judge asked her about Brittany's emails, she started contradicting herself, first saying she never wrote them, then saying I took them out of context, then claiming Brittany made it all up. The judge looked at her for a long moment before granting the restraining order for 1 full year. Outside in the parking lot, I was almost to my car when Dad caught up with me. He stood there looking older than I remembered and said quietly that they'd failed me. He admitted they always knew Lena was difficult, but thought I was strong enough to handle it on my own. Those words hit me harder than anything, because I realized they'd made me the parent, expected me to manage her abuse because I was the strong one. I told him that wasn't what parents should do, that children shouldn't have to be strong enough to handle abuse from their siblings. Then I got in my car and drove away while he stood there in the empty parking lot. 2 weeks after that parking lot meeting, I was was finally settling into campus life. The debate team tryouts were in a big lecture hall with maybe 30 other freshmen, and when they called my name for the mock debate round, I stood up without that usual knot in my stomach. My partner was this guy named Derek who kept cracking jokes between rounds, and for the first time in years, I actually laughed without looking over my shoulder. We made the team together, and afterward went for pizza with some other kids who'd tried out. Nobody asked about my family or why I never mentioned home. They just wanted to know if I'd seen the latest Marvel movie and whether I thought pineapple belonged on pizza. My phone buzzed while we were eating, and it was Brittany texting that Lena had been calling her nonstop, leaving crazy voicemails about how Brittany had betrayed her by testifying. Brittany sent screenshots of the texts too, stuff like, "You ruined my life," and "I know where you work." She was filing her own restraining order and asked if I'd write a statement about what I knew. I typed back that I would, then put my phone away and focused on Derek arguing that ranch dressing was basically salad soup. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize while walking to my economics class. The woman on the other end said she was from the district attorney's office, and they were officially charging Lena with filing a false police report and harassment based on the evidence from the hearing. She said the trial would probably be in 3 or 4 months, and I'd need to testify again. My hands started shaking, but I said yes, I'd be there. That night, I couldn't sleep and just stared at the ceiling in my dorm room. I kept thinking about when we were little, before everything went bad. There was this one Christmas when we built a snowman together, and Lena let me put the carrot nose on. She'd hugged me and called me her best friend. Now I was going to testify against her in criminal court. Some nights I'd dream we were kids again, but this time she'd help me with my homework instead of tearing it up, or she'd save me a seat at lunch instead of telling everyone I smelled weird. I'd wake up with this hollow feeling in my chest, missing something that never even existed. Mid-semester came fast, and Aunt Claire drove up for Parents' Weekend even though I told her she didn't have to. We skipped all the official campus events and just went to this little Italian place downtown where she told me Lena was still living at home, not working, just sitting in her room all day. Mom had apparently tried to get her to apply for jobs, but Lena would scream that everyone was against her. Dad had started sleeping in the guest room because Mom and Lena fought constantly. Aunt squeezed my hand across the table and said she was proud of me for getting out. The next week, I found a letter in my campus mailbox that had been forwarded from my parents' house. The return address was from some therapist's office, and when I opened it, the letter had said Dr. Patricia Hoffman, family counseling specialist. The letter went on about how Lena was her patient and how family healing was crucial for everyone's well-being. She wanted me to come to a session to work on reconciliation and rebuilding bonds. I walked straight to the nearest trash can and dropped it in. My grades that semester were the best they'd ever been. Straight A's in everything, even organic chemistry, which was supposed to be the hardest class for freshmen. My economics professor pulled me aside after class one day and said she was nominating me for an undergraduate research position that usually only went to juniors. It felt like I was finally becoming the person Lena had tried so hard to stop me from being. The support group for people with toxic families became my Thursday night tradition. There were 8 of us who met in the counseling center, and we'd share our small victories like it was the Olympics. When Marcus made it a whole week without his dad calling him worthless, we threw him a pizza party in the common room. When Sarah's mom sent her a guilt trip letter and she didn't respond, we all cheered. These people understood why going no contact wasn't cruel, why sometimes loving yourself meant walking away from blood relatives. 3 months into the semester, I was heading out of the library with my study group when I saw my mom standing by the entrance. She looked older, thinner, and when she saw me, she rushed over before I could turn around. "Lena's in the hospital," she said, grabbing my arm. "She took a bottle of pills last night. She tried to kill herself." The words hit me but didn't really sink in at first. I just stood there while my study group awkwardly excused themselves, and I stared at my mom's face, seeing the blame already forming in her eyes. Then came the guilt, crushing and familiar, followed by anger that she'd shown up here when I'd specifically said no contact, and finally this weird emptiness because part of me wasn't even surprised. Lena had always been willing to do anything when she wasn't winning, and this felt like just another escalation, another way to make everything about her. My phone was buzzing with messages from campus security, asking if I needed anything else, but I just needed to think, so I walked back to my room and sat on my bed for a while. The next morning I called Sandra, the victim's advocate they'd assigned to my case, and she listened while I explained what happened with Lena showing up. Sandra reminded me that whatever Lena was going through mentally wasn't my responsibility to fix. She said I could feel bad for her without putting myself in danger. That helped a little, but I still couldn't shake the weird mix of guilt and anger sitting in my chest. I decided not to visit the hospital, even though Mom kept texting me that I should. Instead, I stayed in my dorm room that whole weekend, remembering all the times Lena had hurt herself just enough to blame me. Like when she'd scratch her arms and tell our parents I'd grabbed her too hard during an argument, or the time she gave herself a black eye with her own fist and said I'd thrown something at her. She'd always been willing to hurt herself if it meant hurting me more. 3 days later, Dad texted me while I was in the library studying for my chemistry exam. His message said Lena was stable and the doctors were keeping her for psychiatric evaluation. Then came the part that made me drop my pen. He wrote that Lena had admitted to the doctors that she wanted to hurt me by hurting herself. It was the first time anyone in my family had actually acknowledged her manipulation tactics out loud. I screenshot the text and sent it to Sandra, who said it would be helpful for our case. 2 weeks passed with me trying to focus on school while dealing with lawyers and court stuff in the background. The district attorney called to say Lena's hospitalization might delay things, but wouldn't stop the trial. Mental health problems didn't excuse filing false police reports or violating restraining orders. The case would continue moving forward. That same afternoon, I ran into Professor Rodriguez at the campus coffee shop, and we ended up talking for an hour. She'd been through something similar with a family member years ago. She told me toxic people usually get worse when you finally set boundaries because they're losing control. She said Lena's actions just proved I'd made the right choice by protecting myself. Her words stuck with me for days. Meanwhile, Brittany had been dealing with her own legal stuff against Lena for the harassment at her job. She texted me one night with a photo of legal papers and a bunch of happy emojis. nervous. Something feels off about the timing of that supposed suicide attempt, right when legal consequences were closing in. Makes me wonder if Lena calculated this move like all her other manipulations. The judge had granted her restraining order and saw right through Lena's victim act in court. We celebrated over video chat with ice cream and bad movies, both of us finally feeling like we could breathe again. The semester kept moving, and somehow I managed to ace my midterms despite everything going on. I joined a study group that turned into a friend group, and we'd get pizza every Thursday after our biology lab. I even started dating this guy Marcus from my English class, who knew my whole story and never once made me feel weird about it. Life was actually happening beyond Lena's shadow for the first time. 4 months into the semester, right before Thanksgiving break, Mom sent me an email with the subject line, "Important Family Update." My hands got sweaty opening it because her important updates were never good. She wrote that Lena had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, and the therapist said it explained everything about her behavior. Then came the part that made me angry. Mom wrote that I should consider forgiving Lena now that we understood what was wrong with her. I spent the next 3 days researching NPD online and in psychology journals from the library. Yeah, it explained why Lena acted the way she did, but it didn't excuse any of it. Mental illness wasn't a free pass to destroy other people's lives. I wrote Mom back saying I understood the diagnosis, but my boundaries weren't changing. She didn't respond for a week. The trial date finally got set for next month, and Sandra started helping me prepare my testimony. We met twice a week in her office downtown, going over every detail until I could say it all without my voice shaking. She had me practice answering the defense lawyer's questions, the ones designed to make me look like the bad sister who abandoned poor sick Lena. After each session, I'd go to the gym and run until my legs burned, because it was the only way to get the anxiety out of my body. A week before the trial, I was walking back to my dorm after class when this girl I'd never seen before came up to me holding an envelope. She said she was just doing a favor for a friend and handed it to me before walking away fast. My hands started shaking when I saw Lena's handwriting on the front. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I did anyway. 20 pages of her crazy ranting filled the envelope, going back and forth between saying she was sorry and then blaming me for ruining her life. She wrote about how I'd always been jealous of her and how I was making everything up to get attention. Then she switched to saying she'd forgive me if I dropped the charges. The last page had stuff about how I'd regret this and how she knew where I lived now. I walked straight to the campus police station with the letter. The officer took one look at it and called the real police since this was a violation of the restraining order. 2 detectives showed up within an hour and took my statement. They bagged the letter as evidence and said this would definitely affect her criminal case. The girl who delivered it got tracked down that same day and claimed she had no idea about the restraining order, that Lena just told her I was her sister and she needed to get an apology letter to me. The next morning, my support group friends were waiting outside my dorm. Word had gotten around about what happened, and they weren't letting me walk anywhere alone anymore. Marcus walked me to my morning classes, Sarah took the afternoon shifts, and a rotating group of others filled in the gaps. They even sat outside the bathroom stalls when I had to pee, which was weird but also made me feel safer than I'd felt in months. My therapist called an emergency session, and we spent 2 hours going over my testimony for the trial. She kept reminding me to stick to facts, not opinions, and to take deep breaths when I felt overwhelmed. The prosecutor called me 3 more times that week to prep me for what Lena's lawyer might ask. She warned me they'd try to make me look vindictive and jealous, maybe bring up any fights we'd had as kids to show I held grudges. The night before the trial, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My testimony cards were spread out on my nightstand, and I kept reaching over to read them again, even though I had them memorized. Every word was true, but I knew Lena would sit there playing victim, while her lawyer painted me as the bad sister who abandoned her sick sibling. I finally gave up on sleep around 4 a.m. and just sat at my desk reviewing everything one more time. The courthouse was packed when I arrived with Sandra and my aunt. Reporters were outside, but Sandra steered me past them through a side entrance. Inside the courtroom, Lena sat at the defense table in this soft pink cardigan looking small and fragile. She had her hair in braids like she used to wear in middle school and kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But when she saw me walk in, her whole face changed for just a second, pure hate flashing across it before she went back to her victim act. The prosecutor started presenting the case piece by piece, laying out the false Title IX complaint first, then the harassment, then showing the pattern going back years. She had everything organized on these big boards with timelines and evidence markers. Brittany took the stand first and walked through finding the emails where Lena admitted to making false claims. She handed over printed copies and the prosecutor entered them as evidence while Lena scribbled notes on her legal pad so hard I could hear the pen scratching from across the room. When my turn came, I walked to the stand on shaky legs. For 2 hours I went through everything, starting with the childhood sabotage and working up to the recent stuff. I kept my voice steady even when Lena's lawyer objected every 5 minutes. I stuck to facts like my therapist taught me, dates and times and specific actions, not how they made me feel. The jury members kept looking between me and Lena, and most of them seemed to be taking lots of notes. During cross-examination, Lena's lawyer brought up her mental health diagnosis that her parents had apparently gotten after everything went down. He asked if I thought someone with anxiety and depression deserved compassion. I looked right at him and said, "Mental illness doesn't give anyone the right to destroy others," and that she made choices. The whole courtroom went quiet after that. The second day of trial, Lena took the stand and turned on the tears immediately. She talked about how lonely she'd been, how I'd always been the favorite, how she just wanted my attention. But then the prosecutor started her cross-examination and caught Lena in lie after lie. Lena claimed she never sent threatening texts, but then the prosecutor pulled them up on the screen. Lena said she didn't know about the restraining order, but then they showed the certified mail receipt she'd signed. Each time she got caught, she'd start crying harder and saying she didn't remember because of her medication. The prosecutor saved the best for last, pulling out Lena's academic records from both high school and college. Multiple instances of plagiarism appeared on the screen, complaints from professors about her lying to get extensions, emails where she blamed other students for her failures. The prosecutor connected each incident to similar behavior toward me, showing the jury this wasn't about mental illness, but about a pattern of manipulation that went back years. The judge called for for a 15-minute recess, and everyone stood up to stretch their legs. I was getting water from the fountain when Dad walked over to me, his face looking older than I'd ever seen it. He stood there for a moment before saying he finally saw what they'd done, how they'd enabled a monster, and he was sorry. I just nodded because what else was there to say after all these years? When court resumed, the prosecutor stood up for closing arguments and pointed at all the evidence on the screen. She explained how this wasn't mental illness making someone act out, but calculated harassment meant to destroy my future. The defense attorney tried to argue about family dynamics and stress, but the jury wasn't buying it. The judge sent them to deliberate, and we all filed out to wait in the hallway. 3 hours felt like 3 days as I sat with Aunt and the friends from my support group who'd come to watch. Mom and Dad sat on a bench across from us, looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past few months. Finally, the bailiff called us back in, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The jury foreman stood up and read guilty on all counts, including filing false reports, harassment, and violating the restraining order. Lena jumped up and screamed that I'd destroyed everything, that I'd ruined her life, but the bailiffs made her sit back down. The judge started reading the sentence, and I held my breath waiting to hear what would happen. 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory therapy sessions, and no contact with me for 5 years. She also had to pay back all my legal fees, which made her face turn even redder. After everyone started leaving the courtroom, Mom walked over to where I was standing with Aunt. She said she'd failed both of us and didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know she was getting therapy. I told her I needed time and space to heal, and maybe someday we could try again, but not now. She nodded with tears running down her face and walked away with Dad, who looked completely broken. A week later, I was back on campus, and everything felt weird and quiet without the constant threat hanging over me. My phone wasn't blowing up with crazy messages, and I wasn't checking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. Professor Rodriguez called me into her office and said she was proud of how I'd stood up for myself. She offered me the research position officially and said my spot was secure no matter what had happened before. Plot twist. Turns out having your life story spread across 20 pages of crazy mail isn't the best way to say sorry. Who would have guessed? Walking back to my dorm, I realized I was still looking behind me, still waiting for the next attack to come. My therapist had warned me it would take time to stop feeling like something bad was about to happen. She said healing doesn't happen overnight, and that my body had been in survival mode for so long it didn't know how to relax. I started going to therapy twice a week and slowly began to feel like maybe I could breathe again. Finals week came faster than I expected, and I threw myself into studying harder than ever before. Every exam felt like proving something to myself, not to anyone else anymore. When grades posted online 3 days later, I stared at my screen in disbelief. My GPA showed 3.9, and my scholarship stayed intact despite everything that had happened. I met Brittany at the campus coffee shop the next afternoon. She'd transferred to my university after all the drama at her old school became too much. We laughed about how Lena's attempts to destroy us had actually brought us together as friends. That night, I sat in my dorm room writing in my journal about everything that had happened. The words came out slowly, but they felt important to write down. I survived even though I had scars from it all. Lena taught me that real family isn't about blood, but about who shows up when you need them. The support group threw a party in the common room to celebrate finishing the semester. Marcus brought cookies and Sarah made punch, and we all sat around talking about how far we'd come. Marcus raised his plastic cup and said we were the family we chose. Everyone got quiet, and some of us wiped our eyes because it was true. Winter break arrived, and I packed my bags to stay with Aunt. Her house felt peaceful, with no drama or sabotage waiting around every corner. We baked cookies and watched movies, and this was what family should have always felt like. 3 days before Christmas, a letter arrived from Dad with a photo inside. The picture showed my childhood bedroom exactly as I'd left it when I moved out. His note was short, but it made my hands shake. He wrote that the room would be there whenever I was ready with no pressure at all. Spring semester started with new energy and hope filling my days. I signed up for harder classes and made deeper friendships with people who understood boundaries. I even started dating someone who respected my need to take things slow. My life was becoming mine without Lena's poison touching any part of it. Mom sent a text in February that I read 5 times before putting my phone down. She wrote that Lena had moved to Arizona for a fresh start and was following all court orders. She said she was respecting my need for space and that she loved me. Standing on campus one afternoon surrounded by my study group, the truth hit me hard. I'd won, but not by destroying Lena the way she'd tried to destroy me. My success and happiness were my revenge because I'd refused to let her break me. Professor Rodriguez called me to her office the next week about my research proposal. I'd worked on it for months and my hands shook as I handed it over. She read through it carefully, then looked up with the biggest smile on her face. She told me I was going to do amazing things in my field. For the first time in my life, I actually believed those words were true. My future belonged to me now without fear or sabotage lurking in the shadows. I walked across campus toward the library where my study group was waiting for our session. The sun felt warm on my face and I didn't look back even once. Well, that's a wrap on this one. Appreciate you letting me wonder about all this right alongside you. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.